My name is Theo. I'm 32 years old and live in Denton, Texas, where I work as an indie video game designer. The day my father died, it felt like the end of something bigger than just his life. Like something had been dying in me for years, and I'd just been too afraid to name it. I remember sitting in the pew at his memorial, the one off to the side because the front row was already full, mostly with people Lance had invited. I couldn't stop thinking about how he spent his last year living in Lance's guest flat. Not that Lance ever took care of him. That was left to the hired aide and occasional guilt-ridden visits. I remember asking once if we could switch things up, if maybe I could take him in for a while. Lance had just leaned back in that stupid designer chair of his, coffee in hand, and said, "He's got a roof and a fridge. What more do you want?" Like that was the gold standard for taking care of your dying parent. A roof and a fridge. I had always adored Dad. Even when he forgot my birthday one year, or when he didn't show up to the launch of my first game, I still made excuses for him. He's just distracted, I'd say. He's always been like that. But the truth was simpler. I was the backup son. The runner-up to the golden child. Lance was the kind of guy who wore power like cologne. Strong, overwhelming, impossible to ignore. CEO of some AI startup that never actually released a product, but everyone thought he was brilliant because he could say disruptive in 5 different ways. Dad ate it up. I'd come over with my laptop to show him a new build I was proud of, some emotionally driven narrative about loss and healing, and he'd nod politely before switching the subject to how Lance had closed a major round of funding. It was like that all my life. School awards? Overshadowed by Lance's science fair win. My first job offer? Barely a blip compared to Lance's fellowship. And even when Lance burned through 2 failed startups and left his second wife halfway through IVF treatments, Dad still managed to say, he's under a lot of pressure. He's doing his best. So when Dad got sick, it felt like maybe I could finally be enough. Maybe taking care of him would finally let him see me. But even then, I had to do it from the sidelines. Lance had the house. Lance got to play host. Lance got the credit. I got to chase down prescription refills and argue with insurance reps. I remember once sitting in the parking lot of a Walgreens, crying into my steering wheel, while a voicemail from Lance played through my speakers. "Can you handle Dad's meds this week? Amira and I are flying to Bali for a launch thing. Thanks, bro." Thanks, bro. And now that Dad was gone, all I could think about was the quiet moments. The ones where I sat beside him while he slept, his face soft and sunken, and wondered if he ever really saw me. If he ever truly knew me, the me who stayed, who carried him through those final months, who wasn't flashy but showed up anyway. But I guess I already knew the answer. He had a roof and a fridge. What more could I want? It happened on a Tuesday. Rainy, gray, the kind of day that makes the whole world feel like it's holding its breath. The doctor's office was cold and sterile, all white walls and metal chairs that creaked when you shifted your weight. I sat beside Dad, gripping the armrest so tight my fingers ached. He looked tired, smaller somehow in that oversized coat he insisted on wearing year-round. The doctor's voice was gentle but direct. Pancreatic cancer. Late stage. 6 months to a year, give or take. I felt the floor drop out. Dad didn't say anything at first. Just nodded slowly, like she'd told him the weather forecast. Meanwhile, my brain scrambled for something to hold on to. A plan, a treatment, a trial, anything. But the doctor had already started talking about palliative care. About making him comfortable. I excused myself and stepped out into the hall. Called Lance. He picked up on the second ring. "Yo, what's up?" I swallowed hard. "It's Dad. He's sick. Terminal. They gave him 6 months." There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough to let me know he was processing it like an email subject line. Then he said, "At least he's comfortable where he is." That was it. That was his reaction. I clenched my jaw. "Lance, we need to talk about logistics. He's going to need rides to appointments, someone to help with meals, meds." "I run a company, Theo," he cut in, exasperated. "I can't be a nurse." "You don't have to be a nurse," I snapped. "You just have to be a son." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, come on. You've always been better at the soft stuff." "I'd just get in the way." Soft stuff. I stood there in the hallway, staring out the window at the wet asphalt below, feeling like I'd been slapped. Again. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, to demand that he step up for once. But I knew how that would go. So I just said, "Right? Of course." "You're busy." "Exactly," he said. "Glad you get it." Then he hung up. I walked back into the exam room, sat down beside Dad, and said nothing. He reached out and patted my knee like he was the one trying to comfort me. Like he hadn't just been handed a countdown clock. I nodded and smiled, like everything was okay. Like I wasn't already crumbling inside. Because someone had to hold it together. And, as always, it wasn't going to be Lance. It started with a note. Just a sticky one, stuck to a stack of unread mail by the microwave. Dad's handwriting had gotten shakier over the months, but I could still make it out. "Theo, check account. Med bill seems high. Love, Dad." He never liked asking for help. Even now, when his hands trembled too much to hold a pen and his meds knocked him out for hours, he still phrased it like a question. Like a favor. I sat at his old desktop that afternoon, squinting at the outdated monitor and trying to remember the password he always used. Something about his favorite band, Fleetwood Mac 71. It worked on the third try. I expected to see a few thousand left. Maybe less, considering how expensive everything had gotten. But what I didn't expect was the number staring back at me. $423. That was it. This was the same account he'd transferred everything into after selling off his comic book collection, pristine Silver Age issues that he kept sealed in Mylar for decades. I remember how proud he was when he told me he'd gotten nearly 35 grand for them. Figured it's better to use it while I'm still around, he said with a smile. Rainy day money. I clicked into the transaction history. There it was. A wire transfer, labeled clean and cold, $32,000, L. Royston Enterprises. I stared at it for a full minute before my mind let me process what I was seeing. L. Royston. Lance. His company. My chest went tight. I called him immediately. He picked up sounding like he was in the middle of a photo shoot. Loud background music. Someone laughing. Hey, bro. What's up? Did you take Dad's money? A pause. Then a sigh. Oh, that. I could hear my voice rising, sharp and clipped. You wired $32,000 out of a dying man's account. That's not a footnote, Lance. That's theft. He didn't even sound fazed. Relax. It was a loan. I needed short-term liquidity for the investor event. It's fine. Fine. My voice cracked. Dad's been rationing his medication because he said it's too expensive. He skipped dinner last week because he wasn't hungry. He was trying to make what he had last. I told him I'd pay it back. Lance, I said, shaking now, he doesn't even know you took it. There was silence on the line. Then, well, maybe he doesn't need to know. Why stress him out, right? I gripped the arm of the chair so hard it creaked. You took everything he had. For what? So you could dazzle some venture capital parasites and get your IPO vanity project off the ground? He snorted. That's a bit dramatic. No. What's dramatic is me sitting here trying to figure out how to pay for Dad's next round of meds while you're out buying fucking drone footage for your pitch deck. I hung up before I said anything I couldn't take back. Then I sat there, staring at the transaction record, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I wanted to tell Dad. I wanted to scream it at him, shake him awake, and show him the truth. But part of me couldn't do it. Not yet. Because how do you tell a man that the son he spent his last year defending just stole his future out from under him? I called Naomi that night. I hadn't spoken to her in a couple weeks, not since the last round of late-night care runs had swallowed my schedule whole. But the second she picked up, and I heard her voice, warm, steady, like always, the weight cracked open in my chest. Hey, she said, a little groggy. Everything okay? No, I said, and my voice broke right there. I told her everything. The savings, the transfer, Lance's smug voice brushing it off like he'd borrowed a pair of socks. I paced the living room in my socks, staring at Dad snoring softly in the recliner, his oxygen machine hissing with every inhale. Naomi just listened. When I finished, there was silence for a second. Then she spoke, low and firm. You can't let him get away with this. I sank onto the edge of the couch. What am I supposed to do? Tell Dad? He's already weak. He's holding on by threads, Naomi. And that gives Lance the right to take everything, she shot back. Theo, that money was for your dad's care, not Lance's ego project. I know. Then what are you waiting for? I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to organize the chaos in my head. If I tell Dad, it'll break him. He still sees Lance as the golden boy. If he knew. He deserves the truth, she said softly. And you deserve peace. This isn't on you. But no one's going to believe me. Not over Lance. Not Mr. Public Success Story. He could burn a house down and talk his way out of it with a TED Talk. Naomi didn't argue. She knew I wasn't wrong. She let out a long breath. Do you have proof? I've got the transfer record. Screenshots. Emails. Everything. Then hang on to it. Why? Because the truth matters, Theo. Even if you don't show it now. Especially if you don't. I sat in the quiet for a second. Dad stirred in his chair and let out a soft sigh, like even his dreams were tired. You think I'm being a coward, I said. No, she replied immediately. I think you're protecting him. But silence only protects Lance too. I swallowed hard. Naomi had always had this way of making things clear without making me feel small. And tonight, her words stuck. You ever think about how weird it is, I said, voice barely above a whisper, that someone can steal from their own dying father and still get to walk around pretending he's the hero? There was a long pause. Then Naomi said, yeah, but not forever. It was a Sunday afternoon when Lance and Amira decided to grace us with their presence. I was in the kitchen, sorting out Dad's pill organizer for the week, when I heard the car door slam. Their white electric SUV, spotless as always, pulled up the driveway like it was being filmed. Probably was, knowing Amira. They came in through the side entrance like they owned the place. Lance with his perfect teeth and business casual swagger, and Amira in a flowing beige dress, holding a box labeled artisanal vegan pastries. She placed it on the counter next to the prescriptions without even looking at them. "Look who's here," Amira chirped, pulling out her phone. "Visiting Dad Day." She snapped a selfie of them both with Dad in the background, barely awake, mouth slightly open, still wearing his hospital gown under a flannel blanket. Flash off, of course. Wouldn't want reality messing with the aesthetic. I stood there, wiping crushed pill residue off my fingers with a paper towel, watching this whole performance like it was some bad sitcom. Lance grinned and clapped me on the shoulder. "Glad to see you're keeping things running, man. We really appreciate you holding it down." I didn't answer. "Oh," he added, turning to Amira. "Did I tell you? We've been covering some expenses too. Med stuff, house stuff. You know." I felt my blood pressure spike. I clenched my jaw so tight my molars ached. He was talking about the same money he'd stolen, painting himself as the benefactor. "Generous as always," I said flatly. Dad opened his eyes for a second, blinking slowly. He saw Lance and managed a tired smile. "Hey, kiddo," he mumbled. That smile, warm and familiar, even through the haze, made something twist in my chest. Because for that 1 second, Dad looked proud. Not of me, of him. Lance knelt beside the recliner and squeezed Dad's hand. "Just wanted to check in on you, old man. You doing okay?" Dad nodded. "Long as Theo's around. He's got it all figured out." Lance smiled like he'd just been knighted. Amira, meanwhile, was busy uploading a story captioned "Family First #grateful #blessed." I glanced over her shoulder and saw my own blurry figure in the background, hunched over a tray of applesauce and meds. When she was done, she turned to me. "You really should take a break, Theo. You look exhausted." "Thanks for the tip," I said, and forced a smile. It got worse. Later, in the kitchen, while Dad dozed off again, Lance leaned in close and said, "You're being a little intense, you know. It's okay to let go a bit. You're not responsible for everything." I stared at him. "I am responsible, Lance. Because someone has to be." He raised an eyebrow. "There you go again. Overly emotional." He said it like a joke. Like I was some fragile burnout. Amira giggled. "I nearly said it, all of it. The money, the lies, the truth Dad didn't know." But I looked down the hall. I could hear Dad's labored breathing from the recliner. He didn't need this. Not now. So I swallowed it. Again. It was almost noon when I spotted him. I had just left the pharmacy, again picking up a refill that insurance wouldn't cover this time, out of pocket. I was crossing the street toward the parking lot when I saw Lance. He was stepping out of some Spoklinic hybrid place downtown, laughing with a tall guy in a designer suit. The kind of laugh that turns heads, all confident and loud and fake. He was holding a little white bag. It had the Rolex logo stamped in gold across the front. I stopped in my tracks. For a second, I honestly thought I might be hallucinating. Maybe the lack of sleep had finally caught up with me. But no, it was him, all right. Lance Royston, the man who stole from our dying father, now apparently in the market for a luxury watch. I crossed the street. "Hey," I said, sharp and sudden. He turned, surprised, then smirked when he saw me. "Well, look who it is," he said, pushing his sunglasses up onto his forehead. "Need something?" I looked him up and down. The suit, the watch bag, the iced espresso in his hand. "Nice watch," I said. "Did Dad buy that for you too?" The smirk faded. His banker friend awkwardly checked his phone and muttered something about waiting in the car. Lance waved him off without taking his eyes off me. "You're really still on this," he said, voice low now. "You sound obsessed." "No, Lance. I sound angry. There's a difference." He rolled his eyes. "I get it. You're stressed. You've always been kind of high-strung." I took a step closer. "You stole from him." "It was a loan." "He didn't know?" "That's not a loan. That's theft." He scoffed and looked around, probably to make sure no one was recording. "You seriously want to do this here?" "Why not?" I snapped. "You were fine spending his money in broad daylight. Why not get called out the same way?" His jaw tightened. Then, in that quiet, clipped voice he used when he wanted to seem like the reasonable one, he said, "Look, if you tell Dad now, in his condition, you'll send him to the grave faster. Do you really want that on your conscience?" I stared at him. There it was. The threat, dressed up as concern. The emotional manipulation so smooth, so practiced, it almost sounded like he cared. "You're unbelievable," I said. He stepped closer. "No, I'm successful, and I get how pressure works. You don't. You've always been a little fragile." I laughed, short and bitter. "No, Lance. I'm the one who's been here. While you play pretend CEO and treat our father's life like a piggy bank." He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Suit yourself." Then he walked off toward his car like nothing had happened. I stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding, watching him go. And I hated that he was right. Not about the money or the lies, but about one thing. If I told Dad, it would break him. And Lance knew it. He was using that knowledge like a weapon, and I was letting him. Naomi had been pushing me to get out of the house for weeks. You need 1 hour that's just yours, she kept saying. Something that isn't tubes and pill bottles and bed alarms. I always brushed her off. But this time, she wore me down. It was an opening at a small downtown gallery, an exhibit about grief and memory, ironically enough. One of the featured pieces was by a friend of ours from college. Naomi promised it'd be quiet, low-key, not the influencer mob kind of scene. So I caved. Told the home nurse I'd be gone 2 hours max and left her with detailed notes, emergency numbers, even a highlighted medication chart. It was the first time I'd been away from Dad in weeks. The gallery was calm, just like Naomi said. Dim lighting, soft music, black and white photographs of empty chairs and overgrown backyards. I should have felt something profound, something healing. But I kept checking my phone. I lasted maybe 45 minutes before the tightness in my chest got too loud. I turned to Naomi. I should go? I've got a bad feeling. She didn't argue. By the time I got to the car, my phone had blown up, 12 missed calls. 9 were from Lance. 2 from the nurse. 1 from an unknown number. My stomach dropped. I hit play on the first voicemail. Lance's voice, sharp and cold. Theo, Dad's gone. You weren't here. Unbelievable. That was it. No details. No softness. Just blame. My chest caved in. I don't remember the drive back. Just the blur of headlights and the pressure building behind my eyes. When I walked into the house, it felt wrong. Too quiet. Dad was still in the recliner, blanket tucked under his chin, eyes closed. But this time, he wasn't breathing. The nurse sat across the room, looking pale, her phone still in her hand. She opened her mouth like she wanted to explain, but I couldn't hear her over the sound of my pulse in my ears. And then Lance walked in from the kitchen. He looked like hell, unshaven, barefoot, rumpled shirt, but his eyes lit up the second he saw me. There he is, he said, loud enough for the nurse to hear. The devoted son, out browsing art while Dad died alone. I froze. Are you seriously doing this right now? I asked, my voice shaking. He held up both hands. Hey, I'm not blaming. Just pointing out the facts. But he was blaming. He wanted everyone to hear it. He wanted it to stick. The nurse stood slowly. I called you both, she said quietly. He passed peacefully. In his sleep. Lance turned to me. He was asking for you, by the way. Kept saying your name. Thought you'd like to know. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Part of me knew it wasn't true. Dad had probably been unconscious for hours. But Lance's words hit the target anyway. I sat down next to Dad and took his cold hand in mine. The guilt wrapped around my chest like a vice. Because even though I had been there every other day, every hour, it was this moment, this one absence, that would follow me. And Lance knew it. And he'd weaponize it. Just like everything else. The funeral felt more like a corporate mixer than a goodbye. The church was packed, not with our extended family or Dad's old bowling buddies, but with polished tech bros and fitted suits and influencer wives in beige and gold. I recognized maybe 10 people. The rest were there for Lance. Amira flitted around, offering tissue packets and faux somber smiles, taking filtered photos of the floral arrangements. She even got a selfie in the limo, captioned, saying goodbye to a legend, #family first, #Conrad forever. The comments poured in before we'd even reached the church. I sat alone near the back. No one spoke to me. I don't know if it was intentional or if I just perfected the art of invisibility after a lifetime in my brother's shadow. The whispers had already started before we even sat down. Wasn't the other son not even there when he passed? Heard he was off doing some art thing. Can you believe that? I clenched my jaw and kept my eyes on the altar. Lance stood at the front, all stoic and glassy-eyed. His suit was perfectly tailored, of course. Tie slightly loosened, just enough to look human. Amira dabbed under her eyes with a silk handkerchief, dramatically. Just as the officiant stepped up to begin the service, he held up a hand. Before we start, the officiant said, his voice echoing slightly, Conrad left behind something he wanted shared today. Lance stiffened. He clearly hadn't planned for this. The officiant reached into a folder and unfolded a letter. This was handwritten and notarized last month, he added, holding it up. It's a personal statement he asked I read aloud. I straightened in my seat. The letter began simply, to my friends, family, and those pretending to be both. There were scattered chuckles. Nervous ones. The officiant continued. I know this room is full of people who barely knew me, and I suspect many are here for reasons that have nothing to do with me. That's fine. But I didn't want to leave this world without setting the record straight. Lance shifted in his seat. I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. I've been quiet too long, and I owe one person in this room an apology. Theo, my son, my constant. The one who sat with me every night, who changed my bandages and never once asked for recognition. My breath caught in my throat. You were never second to me. I was just too blind, too stubborn, too wrapped up in pride to show you how much I depended on you. I saw everything, even when I didn't speak on it. And yes, I know what happened to the savings. A ripple moved through the crowd. I let it go because I didn't want to spend my final months fighting. But I want this on record, that money was not a gift. It was not a loan. It was taken without permission. I hope someday it's returned. But I leave that to karma. Lance went pale. And if anyone here doubts who my legacy is, let me be clear. It's not the son who throws parties in his own honor or curates his grief online. It's the son who stayed. The son who saw me through the hardest year of my life. Theo, you are my greatest pride. The officiant folded the letter. Silence. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. Amira looked stricken, eyes darting around like she was waiting for a cue. Lance sat perfectly still, his hands gripping the seat in front of him. Someone in the third row whispered, "Did he really say Lance took the money?" Someone else said, "Holy shit." Lance stood up, face flushed. That letter is fake. The officiant didn't flinch. It's notarized. Witnessed. Filed with his estate attorney. Lance's voice cracked. This is ridiculous. He was confused. He didn't mean but no one was listening anymore. He stormed down the aisle, Amira scrambling after him, her heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. And just like that, the golden boy fell. I sat still, stunned. Not vindicated. Not proud. Just seen. For the first time in my life. The days after the funeral were a blur of quiet texts and cautious emails. People who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly remembered how to spell my name. Old family friends sent short, awkward apologies, didn't know the full story. Should have asked. A few even dropped off casseroles. The kind of condolences you offer someone who didn't just lose a parent, but had to fight for the right to mourn him properly. Naomi came by the next evening with a stack of takeout and a bottle of wine. You were incredible, she said, pushing a container of pad thai toward me. Heard Lance tried to post something yesterday? I nodded. He deleted it in under an hour. Good, she said, raising her glass. To the truth. We clinked. I'd spent so long preparing for the fallout, the social media spin, the smear campaign, the inevitable guilt from relatives who just wanted peace. But it never really came. Instead, Amira scrubbed several posts off her feed, all the curated shots with Dad, the cherished final moments, captions, the humble brag eulogies. She unfollowed me a day later. Lance went dark altogether. No press appearances, no startup updates, no damage control. Just silence. I liked it better that way. With Naomi's help, I finally opened the small studio I'd been dreaming about for years, a modest space above a bakery, with scuffed hardwood floors and sun-bleached windows. We called it The Nest, after one of the games I'd made, a quiet, meditative piece about building something small and meaningful. It became a community hub for young artists and game developers who couldn't afford fancy software or formal education. I framed Dad's letter and hung it on the wall by the front door. People asked about it sometimes. I'd smile and just say, it's a reminder of why I'm here. One night, after locking up, I stopped by the house. Not for any reason, really, just habit. The porch light was still out. The mailbox overflowed. Inside, everything was just as we'd left it. I stood in the hallway for a long time, then stepped into the living room, where Dad's recliner still sat by the window, the blanket folded neatly over the armrest. His oxygen machine, unplugged and pushed aside. I took a deep breath, pulled my phone from my pocket, and found the photo I'd saved, the one of us from when I was 10, both of us covered in mud after a failed gardening attempt, him laughing with his head thrown back. I looked at that smile for a long time. Then, in the quiet, I whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." And I meant it, not just for the letter, but for finally choosing to leave me the one thing I'd wanted all along. The truth.